offers a wide range of internal growth. If you have a goal in mind and you put your mind to it, your successes can be endless.
There are so many jobs within this company that you can rotate into.
I like challenges. AgCountry gives me challenges.
Yeah, AgCountry is a great place to work. There's plenty of flexibility. You're never tied to your desk. There's a team here that is always there for you.
Yeah, grab your role and run with it, and always be aware of the opportunities because they're in front of you.
In a little bit, we're going to be saying good afternoon. Welcome, and we appreciate you coming in today. My background, this is my 24th year. I entered my 24th year of planning on September 1 of this year. So, seeing a thing or two, and hopefully we'll educate you today and give you a little insight. Bobbi, I'll have you introduce yourself, and then we'll get rolling on the presentation.
Sure, thanks, Russ. I'm Bobbi Sondreal. I've been with AgCountry for 3 years, but prior to that did some trust officer work at a local bank for many years before that. So not as seasoned as Russ, see, not as much gray hair, or I color it.
Is that a nice way of saying old?
But anyways, so onward with the presentation.
All right, go ahead, Bob.
Oh.
All right, we're going to go through the slides today at probably auctioneer speed. There's a lot to talk about. We just want to give you some information. In the back, we've got handouts. So if you've got anything that if you want to take one, our information's on that, as well as the presentation that Bobbi and I are going to go over today. Here's what we do in succession and retirement planning. There's 5 areas. We cover estate planning, which are wills, trusts, durable powers of attorney, transition planning, which kind of speaks for itself, farm succession and retirement. Retirement, everybody retires at some point, but a farmer's retirement looks much, much different than the guy that's got a job in the city. So that's a whole different approach. We do a tremendous amount of work with farm entities. We'll talk more about this when we get into the body of the presentation and talk about how we work with entities. And then probably one of the most interesting aspects of our job is working with the families. Most of the time this is a fun thing. You get the families together, you explain how the plan works, and every now and then we get into that situation where it isn't going so good. So our role is to serve agriculture in all 5 of those areas and ensure that that farm is taken care of to the best of our abilities. Where do you start? Give us some time. We need time to help you. There are a lot of tools available. A lot of you have one shot at this, especially if you're transitioning, and we want you to know what you're doing, why you're making decisions. As I said, there's a ton of things that can be done, and we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing for you. Next one, Bobbi. Communication, if you remember one thing today, folks, it's this. Communication is the glue. It either makes or breaks the plan. If poor communication, I'd call that the dynamite. When we don't have good communication, it can really take a farm apart. And so communication is ensuring that everybody's on the same page. Every now and then I'll start a meeting and I'll ask Mrs. the goals and Mr.'s the goals, and they're diametrically opposed. So you kind of wonder, are you even talking? So we also want to know the plan for the farming children. What's on their mind? The one thing that we see sometimes is there's expectations out there on the part of the farming children, the part of the parents. Those expectations don't get communicated. But when those expectations don't get met, we get angry, we get upset, we get hurt. So it's very, very important that those expectations, both on the part of the farming and the non-farming children as well, are communicated clearly so we can help you work through them. Next one, Bobby. All right, let's start with estate planning. The key to this is if it's not in writing, it just doesn't exist. We can't tell you how many cases we've worked through where somebody had a conversation with somebody, probably in the shop or at the kitchen table at the farm, that's going to be yours someday, or I'm going to make sure that you get that. And they die, and all of a sudden that, whatever that is, doesn't go the way the child heard it. So everything about an estate plan needs to be written down, and that's a lot of what we do is we'll make sure that it's properly documented. All right, let's talk about fair versus equal. One of the more interesting parts of starting a meeting is I will ask, as well as Bobby, is are you more oriented with your estate plan to being fair or equal? And they'll say, I want to be equal but fair. And we'll go, how do you do both? You can't. So what we'll do is sit down and talk to you about the difference. Generally speaking, in an equally distributed plan, we almost always don't have a farming heir. Okay, and so it's probably okay to take that farm apart, to dismantle it, to put certain components into each of the children's name. Whereas if we've got a farmer coming in, when we've got a successor, we have to talk about fair. Fair means the estate is not going to be equal. So if we've got a $4 million farm, each child doesn't get $1 million worth of assets. Now, there are ways to do that, and if that's your goal, we'll help you get there. But if you look at the bottom, that line in the yellow there, it says if you are transitioning, your will or trust needs to transfer an ongoing business. That's vital. We can't tell you how many times we look at a will or a trust, we've got a successor, and the will or trust effectively takes that farm apart. The buyouts are too high, there's too many buyouts, and if you think about it, all of a sudden that 85-year-old farmer's deceased, and their 60-year-old son or daughter has to start making buyouts from siblings. First off, do they want to do it at that age? And secondly, will it work? So we've got to have that conversation early. Essentially what we'll do is take that balance sheet and we'll run it through your will or trust and pretend you just died, and we'll show you how your will or trust is going to unfold. So it's key that we take a hard look at that estate plan and make sure how it's going to unfold. Titling is a big deal. I won't go through every dot on the page here. Titling makes a huge difference. If you've got jointly owned property, you don't need a will. If you've got something with a beneficiary, you don't need a will. However, when we get into states where there's an estate tax, like Minnesota, titling is a big deal. Now we've really got to split the land up so that it's 50-50 in each person's name, or at least try to split the estate so that it's 50-50. So a lot of this is predicated on the laws, the state we're in, if there is an estate tax, and what the family ultimately wants done. All right, a will or trust, which one should I have? It depends entirely on the circumstance. The tall and the short on a will versus a trust is in a trust-based estate plan. We can actually transfer assets into a trust. So a trust can own something. And when you do that, you avoid probate for trust-owned assets. So where might we do that? If you own real estate in multiple states. If you want to make your estate settlement private. When you go through probate, probate is that legal means to take your name off an asset and put somebody else's name on. That is a public process, and people can see your will. Your will can be made public. With a trust-based estate plan, you can't. Okay, so we'll just leave it at that, and if you've got any questions after the presentation today, we'd be happy to address them at that point. Don't forget about your durable power of attorney and your healthcare directive. These are documents that are utilized when you're alive. If you become disabled and somebody needs to act on your financial and legal issues, we need a durable power of attorney. If you have medical issues and somebody needs to make a healthcare decision on your behalf, we need a healthcare directive. So that kind of rounds out and completes the estate plan.
I'm going to jump in here and talk about, is my estate taxable? This has been getting a lot of hype because there's been some talk of changing the rules that we play by now. So I will tell you the current rules, then Russ will cover kind of what the proposals have said, and we've even got some new information that isn't in your packet because it was so new. So we'll go over some of that. So right now, an unlimited amount can be transferred to your spouse at death with no estate tax due. We call that portability. So you're able to transfer as much as you want to your spouse as long as they're below the limit, doesn't cause an estate tax. Most of the estate tax will occur at the second death. The limits right now for 2021 are $11,700,000 per person on a federal level. So effectively, if you're married, $23,400,000. So as long as we have an estate lower than that, we don't owe any federal estate tax. Minnesota plays by its own set of rules, as they often do, and so $3 million is their estate tax exemption per person. They do not have the portability option where you can transfer it over to your spouse, so you may need to use it at the first spouse to die depending on the size of your estate so you don't lose it. There is an additional exemption for farmland and small business property that could give you an additional $2 million, bringing it up to $5 million in Minnesota. But still, if you live in Minnesota, you need to make sure your plan is in place. A lot of times we talk about gifting when we are transitioning machinery, things like that. So people ask, how much can I give away? Well, annually, that exclusion is $15,000 per person. So you can give $15,000 per person to anyone in this room. I'll be the first in line, and you don't even have to tell the IRS. If you go over that amount, you do need to let them know. So let's say I gift a $300,000 tractor, I can use up my $15,000, and now essentially I have to let the IRS know that I went $285,000 over their annual limit, and it would come off of my $11,700,000 that I talked about earlier. You don't get two of those limits. It's either you use it during life or you use it at death. It's available to you. That's just the example I kind of went through. So we'll just pass it over to Russ that this is the ideas that they're toying with to change some of the things I just talked about.
Thanks, Bobbi. All right, back in March, we had a number of proposals put forth by a number of senators and House members to find ways to fund some of the spending that you're seeing. I'm going to go through those, and then we're going to talk about some information that we got Monday from the House Ways and Means Committee. The first is the STEP Act. The STEP Act is the one that scares everybody the most, and that's because it's the one that eliminates the step-up in basis. So simply put, what that means, if you bought a piece of land a number of years ago for $500 an acre, and that land is worth $4,000 an acre when you die, the value for purposes of calculating any gain on that, if the land is sold, goes from $500 to $4,000. That's a step up. And by the way, that also occurs with your depreciated assets, like your building site and your tractor. The other thing that the STEP Act did is it imposed a transfer tax for any unrealized gain over $1 million. So if you've got land you've got gain on, machinery that you've got gain on, what the STEP Act was going to do was tax you on the gain that exceeded $1 million. Okay. There's other items on there too. We'll get into some of the changes we got on Monday that relate to this. Let's go to the next one, Bobbi. Then there was the other one that came out, and the main sponsor here was Senator Bernie Sanders, and he did this in 2019 as well. Back then it was called the 99.8% Act. Now it's the 99.5% Act, and essentially what it does is it brings the federal estate tax exemption from $11.7 million per person down to $3.5 million per person. And then it imposes a tax on the excess of 45%. But the rest of the story on the 99.5% Act is that it had a tiered structure for the estate tax. As your estate got larger, the tax got larger. So for a billionaire, the estate tax was 65%. Okay? And it's funny, if you look at that bill, it's kind of interesting reading because they've got every billionaire listed on that bill. It shows what the estimated value of the estate is now, what the tax would be under the current rules, and what the tax would be under the proposed rules. So when you don't have something to do someday, Google that and you'll have some interesting reading. Then the final act was the American Families Plan, and this was presented by President Biden. It basically takes into consideration all components of the STEP Act and adds a couple of additional items. It took away the 199A qualified business deduction that a lot of you got a few years ago. It eliminated the tax-free exchange for 1031 exchanges. And what that means is you can sell land and exchange it for other land and not pay any tax. That's a big deal in agriculture. And what they were proposing to do was limit the amount that you could transfer tax-free. $500,000 if you're single, $1 million if you're married. So let's get into what we saw on Monday.
This is the more optimistic thing for us to
Yeah,
deliver.
and this was really good news, and I've got to thank our government advisor, Howard Olson. He's sitting right over there with the sunglasses on his head. He's doing a great job keeping everybody in the loop here at AgCountry because we think it's important to be on this. And he's on it daily, and he's feeding us information, and it just really helps us help you folks. But what came out from House Ways and Means on Monday was keep the step up, no transfer tax. There were some taxes that were being proposed for folks with income that exceeded $400,000. That was significantly watered down. There was no impact on the 1031 exchange. And then there was, maybe some bad news is that the income tax rates go up for people that make over $450,000 a year. We don't have time to get in all those details, but this is really good news, folks. Okay? And the thing that we were hoping to happen is starting to happen. Now, all components of the STEP Act, the 99.5% Act, the American Families Plan are not going away. And I also need to tell you that this is just House action. This has to go through the Senate yet. Okay? And so we'll see what happens. We'll see what comes out the other side. The other thing I forgot to mention on the previous slide is that the estate tax exemption will be impacted if the proposal by House Ways and Means is passed. The exemption, as Bobbi mentioned, is 11.7. It would take it down to $5 million, which is where it was in 2017. And that's what was going to happen anyway. So the plan with the 2017 tax law was that the estate tax would double to $11 million in 2017, and then it would gradually increase until December of 2025, and then it would sunset. So right now it's at 11.7. It would revert back to where it was in 2017 to roughly $5.5 million. Well, what the proposed House Ways and Means Committee Act or legislation does is it accelerates that and brings that exemption back to $5 million the end of this year. Okay? So it's better news than what we saw. It's not what we want, but it's definitely moving in the right direction. So. Is this one mine, Bobbi?
I'm not sure you've been following the plan exactly,
Yeah, probably
but we need to be flexible in our plans. So I will just cover this. So in addition to the other tools that we have for our estate plan, a lot of times we focus a lot of our attention on the land transfer. That's usually what makes up a majority of your estate value and what will also keep the farm going. So we talk about different options as far as leaving that to your heirs. So equally, that would be, let's say you have 3 kids, you leave it to your 3 kids and each have an undivided 1/3 interest. That's the easy way for you. Not as easy maybe if you have a farmer to negotiate with their siblings and own all of their land with their siblings. So we talk about the pros and cons of doing that. Specific, maybe we leave specific parcels to each of our children, but with that we tie some rights of first refusal or options to purchase. Then we need to go back to what Russ said before and make sure that if we have an option for our farming child to purchase, that it's doable, that it's not an $11 million buyout or something crazy that they could never afford and keep the farm going. We also sometimes use a farmland trust. Maybe we want to give the farmer time to purchase, or maybe we don't trust all of our children, or maybe we don't trust our children's spouses. That's sometimes the case. And we can use a combination of these things for each situation of what we're dealing with. Land transfer ideas while we are alive. So sometimes we use an entity. So we often use a triple LLP, limited liability, limited partnership, to keep all of our land base together in this partnership. But we have this partnership agreement, which is kind of what I call our rule book. How does that land ownership need to be handled? Who do we rent it to? At what rate? If there's a buyout, we can buy out their percentage of their partnership interest rather than a specific parcel of land. And we can have buyout provisions in there. Who can own it? All of those things, we get to lay the groundwork if we choose to use that entity. Life estate and revocable living trust. So the life estate we often are using to try to do some asset protection for nursing home purposes, and we'll get to that a little later. And then revocable living trust. Russ touched on using a will or a revocable living trust in our estate plan. If we transfer the asset into the revocable living trust while we're living, it sometimes eases the process of settling your estate because we avoid probate. The trustee can step in and start doing what they need to do right after your passing without needing to go to the courts and get appointed and such. We also want our estate plan to cover where does our machinery go. I'd love to see everyone transition their machinery to the next heir if you have a successor, or be able to have that pay all the bills auction sale at the end of the day. But in the event that you're not here to do either of those things, where do we want the machinery to go to make sure that our wishes are handled? The farm site, huge deal. If we have a successor, how does the successor keep going? Likely by having ownership or being able to access headquarters. Where are all our bins? Maybe some bins that they've been putting up on dad's land or mom's land or whatever it is. We need to make sure that they're able to either purchase it or that they receive it in our estate plan. And that all needs to be written down and conveyed to your family so that they know why you might do these things. I'll let you do this one.
You're going to let me do the
Yeah,
nursing?
uh-huh.
Okay. All right, let's talk about this. When I first started doing this business, the most I knew about the nursing home was the one I drove by every morning. I knew it was a nursing home, and that's as far as I got. As the costs have increased, almost every meeting now, we get into some level of conversation with our customers about protecting assets from a nursing home or having a plan. The thing about this is you need to give yourself time. This is where it's very important that we get in front of you sooner rather than later. If you're in your late 50s or early 60s, now's the time to start talking about this. So we've got a good plan in place when it's time to take action. The average stay is about 3 years. Right now, costs vary between $8,000 to $12,000 a month. I had my world record last week. I met with a couple, $19,000 a month. And they're burning up assets quicker than they can produce them. The states are required by the federal government to recoup Medicaid expenses. So when you apply for medical assistance and you get assistance, that's Medicaid, not Medicare. And the government has a requirement that the states do what they can to recoup assets that are considered to be available. One thing we'll talk to you about is what's your attitude? Do you feel that you have an obligation to pay these costs out of your pocket? In other words, sell stuff. Or do you want land protected? And neither one of you are wrong. It's just your attitude. You tell us what you want, and we'll make sure that we have a plan designed, as long as we can do it, to help you. So you've got three choices: pay for it on your own, buy insurance, or apply for medical assistance. When you're planning for a nursing home, your marital status matters. If you're married, you can protect more assets. You can protect your personal residence, and generally contiguous land. I mean, you can't, if you've got 800 acres contiguous, that's not going to work, but generally 40, 50, maybe up to 80 acres. You can keep one car, You can keep other assets up to $130,800 plus $3,000 for the spouse who's confined. And then the individual who's not confined, which has a great name, it's called a community spouse. I've always thought, couldn't they come up with a better name than community? How'd you like to be a community spouse? And so that individual can keep the income that's attributable to their assets. If you're single or widowed, the most you can keep is $3,000. And if there's anybody in here from South Dakota, that's $2,000. This is what we'll do with you. I won't get into all the details. We'll run a cash flow. What do you have in terms of income? What do those assets produce in terms of income? Do you have nursing home insurance? From this chart, we get an idea of, do you have nursing home risk? So the first thing we'll do is try to assess your risk to see if we even need to do any asset protection strategies. Next one, Bobby. So what do? This is the understatement of the day, but we'll tell you don't own assets. And that's the best thing you can do, because if you don't own them, they're not available. But if you do decide to transfer assets out of your name, there's a string attached, and that's called a look back. That's the period of time that the assets have to be out of your name before they're considered uncountable or not available. And that period is 60 months. Let's call it 5 years. And so a lot of times what we'll do, especially with land, Bobby mentioned a life estate. We'll transfer the land into the names of your children, reserve a life estate for you, which means you get the cash rent income, and after 5 years, that land is protected. Now, it's not that simple in South Dakota, and it's not that simple in Minnesota. Again, we don't have time today to get into those details, but just know that there are some tools. The other thing we'll do is talk to you about selling assets. Generally speaking, we're talking about this when we haven't had a good planning meeting and it's too late. You know, I'm meeting with a family right now, they did nothing. And that's the $19,000 a month family. They did no planning. So we've got a plan for which land gets sold first. If we need more land, we know which land's going to get sold next. So where does that become a problem? In the will. You know, whose land gets sold? So that's why we want to do advanced planning when we're starting to talk about the nursing home. I'll just quickly mention irrevocable trust. Irrevocable trusts are the type of trust that cannot be changed. Once they're set up, it's like a block of concrete. Whereas a revocable trust is a putty. It's a block of putty. It can be molded, mended, and changed. An irrevocable trust can't. They work in North Dakota. They do not work in Minnesota. There's limited application in South Dakota.
I'm going to jump in here. We only have a few minutes left because we want to leave time for questions because we want to answer what you guys are caring about. But retirement planning, so we help with this. If we don't have a successor, how do we get you out and do it tax efficiently? We're never going to have you have no tax. We'd be in jail. However, we can help you do that if you give us time and we can kind of ease out of the process. I'm just going to skip. Sometimes we use pension plans to get you out. If you are retiring, we have that auction sale. We need to create some sort of expense and a place to put that money so that it's available to you and we don't end up sending 40% into the IRS to pay the tax, so we can use pensions. There's specific rules involved, but we've had these work really well with some of our farmers. I'll touch on entities. Sometimes if your farming operation looks like it needs an entity and it's going to make something better, so maybe family members farming together, maybe we have to have a partnership. Maybe in the transition of machinery, we need a corporation in order to sell shares versus individual pieces of machinery. We can do that, but we want to make sure that we're not just making entities to make entities. We want to make sure that they have a purpose and they make our operation better. On that note, you also need to have agreements in place like buy, sell. We have this entity. Now, what do we do with it in the event of death, disability, dissolution, divorce, or departure? In any one of those cases, what happens? Who can buy it? At what price? What happens if someone gets divorced? Can their ex-spouse own it? So we want to make sure that if we have an entity, we have the proper documentation as far as our agreement on the other end. Russ, you want to?
Sure, you bet. This is where we get into the time issue. Transition, you really want to give yourself some time. There's a lot of tools that we can use, and I'll just touch on one real quickly. One is an operating lease for machinery. It's become very, very popular. I'm not talking about renting, I'm talking about an actual lease where you want to be able to derive some income from your machinery, but there are tax rules in place that if you sell machinery, say over a 5 to 10 year time frame, this nasty tax trap called an installment sale rule comes into play, which requires all of the taxes be paid in the first year. So an operating lease is a better way to go. You can actually lease the equipment. Generally, there's a 15 or 20% buyout at the end of the lease, and that's a nice way to take care of that. And that's why we say 5 to 10 years, because a lot of the leases we set up go 5 to 10 years. So that just gives you an idea. But we want to make sure that you're talking, that communication is so vital. Those expectations that the successor has, those expectations that our senior farmer has need to be on the table, and there needs to be a plan for each of them. Let's go back to that previous slide, because I want to touch on this, and you'll pick something out here. This is where we're having a little fun with you. The biggest transition, or the biggest opposition to transition is poor communication.
It's up there a few times.
Every time. Yeah. So, all right, Bobbi, let's go.
Which is why we have family meetings to try to enhance that communication. We can help with them, unless you're my family, and if they're watching on live stream, I apologize. No, I'm just kidding. But sit down at the table and explain to your family why you're doing the things that you're doing. They don't have to like it. They're not entitled to anything. But I can tell you that it's a lot easier if you hear it from the horse's mouth as to why they want to do things the way that they are. Should we go ahead?
Yeah, I guess this is, our job is really simple. This is all we have to worry about, right? Give us some time to give yourself the gift of communication. It is so important that the families rally, work together. I know this sometimes is going to be tough. Bobbi and I have seen situations where we get into the farm and they're already down the path of poor communication. Don't give up. Let us help you. Let us show you how we can get your farm transitioned or get you into retirement as comfortably as you can. Remember, you kind of got one shot at this, and we want to make sure you're doing it right.
So Rob has a microphone if anyone has questions.
Yep, we got one right over here. Hold on.
Perfect.
I was wondering at this point, do you know what's going to happen with the transfer of the unified credit? Right now we're under 11.7.
Yep.
Will that get changed or?
Correct. Yep, that's a good question. The transfer of the unified credit, what came out Monday was a proposal to reduce it back to where it would have gone the end of 2025. And that was going to be where the estate tax exemption was in 2017, and that was $5 million, adjusted upward for inflation. And so with that, the way to maybe zero in and put some numbers on your question, somewhere's around $5.5 million apiece. So for a married couple, roughly $11 million. And we don't know what the exact number is, but that's where we see it today, based on what came out on Monday. So it was 11.7 per person. It looks, based on what came out of House Ways and Means, that it might go down to 5.5. But again, this has to go through the Senate yet. There's a lot of work to do. But that's probably the best way I can answer that for you.
I will just note in that proposal, there was also some additional exemptions potentially for farms using the 2032A election, which is you have to have a family member farm it for 10 years. There's a lot of things that can mess that up. However, they talked about allowing additional exemptions for that situation to try to help the family farm.
If you want to read it, I got it right here. Okay. It's
we'll
captivating.
Wake you up when you're done. Go ahead.
Russ, as a follow-up to that, if you take advantage of, with the cost basis step up going away, if you would, let's say the situation would be where you'd want to do a gift and file a gift tax return that's over what the exemption's going to be. So let's say you do a $7 million gift or an $8 million gift of land right now, and then it falls below that in the future. Do you know how they treat that or how they will treat that if the if it's lower than that when they pass?
Yeah, what they're going to do, Paul, what Paul's asking is if they reduce the exemption down to say 5.5, and you had made a $7 million gift in 2020 or 19, they're going to split, they're going to look at what law was in place at the time. So right now, they would grandfather you in. They would say that $7 million gift will not be taxed. Okay? So a lot of people are considering making some pretty substantial gifts this year, and if you're thinking about that, you probably want to get the ball rolling sooner rather than later, because every attorney in the country that does this work is going to be very busy once we know more about these rules. But the direct answer, Paul, is that it's going to be grandfathered in.
And you don't get any extra. So if they reduced it to 5 million, there's no more room, you don't get any extra. So just make that clear that anything else above that prior gift would be taxable at that time. Any other questions?
We still have time for a few more. Covered a lot of topics. I'm sure there's going to be some questions out there.
What states do we have here? How about North Dakota? Oh, most of you. Minnesota? Yeah. South Dakota? Okay.
Any other
Sure,
states?
there's others.
No?
Well, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I love taking Russ's ear off. He's a wealth of information. On that operating lease, is there any gifting that's happening during that? And if you tie that with your land, do you have to worry about a separate entity on that operating lease, a Schedule C, when you're just leasing the equipment?
For the operating lease?
On the machinery?
I'm not sure I quite follow that, Paul.
So the income from the operating lease when you're leasing your machinery, is that still unearned income for tax purposes if you tie it with like your land rent and things like that in one contract? Do you have to, if you do that separately without the land rent, is that another entity that you have to worry about earned income on that?
Could be subject to self-employment tax. It's generally it's going to be rental income, because when you read an operating lease, okay, it says a lot of the attorneys in the operating lease will use the word rent for the payment. They won't say payment, they will say rent. And a lot of the accountants are going to, because you're in the business of farming, you're a farmer. Even though you may be retired, because you're actively farming, you could be subject to self-employment tax on that lease payment. So a lot of times we'll try to tie that together with a land contract. That's difficult to do with an operating lease. Okay? So just it's something we'll talk to you about if you come in and see us. You're going to get the full picture, so there aren't any surprises, because you got to know the tax implications for everything that you're thinking about doing.
Any more questions? If not, I know Bobbi and Russ, you're going to be around here for a little bit afterwards. You will probably be at the AgCountry Fultz building with our AgCountry booth over there if you have additional questions, where we also have tax specialists too for just regular tax outside of estate planning and those things as well. So with that, if the two of you got any last parting words coming into this time of frame and looking at either retirement or succession, what are your ending thoughts?
Well, I would just say hold on. We're not done with all the proposals and see what ends up happening. So be ready to take action. It's never a bad idea to talk about what your action plan would be if this happened or this happened. So we have a plan A and plan B, and we can kind of be ready to do something if necessary.
Yeah, and I would just follow up on that. We kind of went through this in 2011 when President Obama and Congress was looking at making some fairly drastic changes. What they were proposing to do in 2011 was what we call decoupling the estate tax from the gift tax. Okay? Right now, that 11.7 million, as Bobbi mentioned, is the amount you can leave through your estate tax-free, the amount you can gift in your lifetime tax-free, or a combination of both. The IRS says use what you want, use it the way you want. Decoupling was proposed in 2011 is where we would have $1 million gift tax exemption, and they were talking about either a $3 or a $5 million estate tax exemption. That created a lot of angst with our customers, and everybody wanted to run out and gift, gift, gift. Well, we advised, slow down, let's see where this goes. And we found out, it was late, but we found out that it was wise to wait. And we are of that opinion now. You know, keep an eye on it. If you've got questions, we've got brochures in the back. You can call Bobbi or I, and we can do the best given what we know at the time. But when we've got a lot of legislation that's being churned up right now, we don't want to make a lot of hasty decisions. Keep an eye on it. If this makes you nervous, call us. You know, we'll try to get in and get you in and get something put together to help you. So, well, we appreciate you coming today. As Rob mentioned, stop by our booth over in the Foltz building. We'd be happy to talk to you, and we'll hang around afterwards if you've got any additional questions as well. But thank you. Appreciate you coming.